We've started off the new week and ended the Columbus Day weekend on a good note. Now we move on to see what the future holds for us as we move through this week of October the 10th, 2022. Tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show, brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware at 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon, New York, and Southwest Suffolk County on Long Island, serving the entire New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, tri-state area with everything you need to make sure your home looks terrific, functions properly, and can protect you in case that there's some adverse weather. And of course, come wintertime, Long Island's largest provider of rock salt. And people come from all over the place to get it when they can't find it where they are. Also, mulch and topsoil. Make sure your yard looks good this fall. And as we said, the stuff you need like batteries and maybe a working generator and a sump pump and among other things, all at Omni True Value Hardware. 631-756-1125 for the best prices in town. And the website is
OmniTrueValue.com. And Joe, if no one has said this to you as yet, let me be the first. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day.
Oh, happy Indigenous Peoples Day to you.
That's the new terminology for this day.
Yes. So, aside from that, and the politics that go with it,
yes.
Here's an interesting note that was left to me by our good friend and occasional guest, retired meteorologist Tony Gigi, formerly of National Weather Service Mount Holly, great forecaster. And he said that looking back at the last 30 years in Philadelphia, with regards to the month of October, there were 15 below normal temperature Octobers. So that means that there were 15 above. But of those 15 Octobers, 10 of them led to below average temperature winters, which is kind of interesting. It's a smallish data set, but not terribly small. It's not 3 or 4, at least it's 15. So I know there's a bunch of other things you need to look at to get the math, a little more accurate. And I wish he had gone like 60 years or 90 years to see what the count is. But that's a 67% success rate for winter weather lovers, I think.
So you're saying that in the 15 that were below normal, that was a signal that the winter as a whole, the upcoming or forthcoming winter, was below normal.
67% of the time, 10 out of the 15. So two-thirds of those 15 below normal winters. Now, I don't know what the stats were with regards to the above normal winters, how many of those turned into below normal winters. Temperature-wise, says nothing about snow, which is a totally different issue. But you can use Philadelphia. You can say, okay, well, it's one spot, but it's probably going to be true for a larger geographic area surrounding Philadelphia. I don't know how far away from there it extends. I also don't know what the stats are for New York City or for Boston or for Hartford. It'd be interesting to see what they come up with that. But it's a stat, and for what it's worth, I don't know. I wouldn't go out there. I would not go out there with that one stat saying, okay, we're going to have a below average temperature winter, just throwing it out there to offer some hope. Let's put it that way for the winter weather lovers. I want to be clear that I'm not advocating a below normal temperature winter, particularly at a time when heating oil is roughly at about $5 a gallon or more. So, just want to leave it there.
Yeah, I'm not too keen on cold weather myself. We did get down yesterday morning to 34 degrees. I don't know what we got down to here this morning, but I think we had a milder morning because we had more cloud cover. And we had a lot of clouds out there for a while this afternoon. They have now all gone, and it looks like it's going to be another clear moonlit night out there this night after the Hunter's full moon.
Yeah, there was on the analysis this morning. I saw there was a stationary front drawn across upstate New York. It looked like a little ripple was moving along it, and that created some of the cloud cover. But if you were in central and South Jersey, if you were in much of central and southern PA, and points south, it was pretty much sunny all day long. So, but let's go back in time, Joe. Bit of a way back machine moment. I actually remember this. I remember walking in Throgs Neck. I remember walking down a side street on a very cloudy day. Right, this was on the 10th of October, and James Harris sent this to me today, and I would share it with everybody. And of course, I got to get myself out of the way and maybe center it a bit. But this was on. Oops, sorry about that. That should not have happened. But this was on October the 10th. Let's try it again. This was on October the 10th, 1979, the earliest Central Park snowfall. A cold front mixed with the punch of cold Canadian air caused a surprise snowstorm across the northeastern part of the nation. In Central Park, a trace of snow was recorded, so I could say the same for the Bronx. It was a trace of snow. Most of the snow melted as it touched the ground. The dramatic elements of the storm in the metro area were a series of water spouts in New York Harbor near the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, and they were caused by this clash between the cold Canadian air and the ocean water temperature, which was still at a relatively mild upper 50s. And West Milford, New Jersey, got 4 inches out of that, and Waterbury, Connecticut, 3 inches. And this is courtesy of the National Weather Service office in New York, New York. Actually, the National Weather Service office is not in New York, New York, but in Upton, Long Island. So it's in Upton, New York. So
I remember that well because a good friend of both Todd Gross, I was working at the time for a private weather forecasting service, and there was a gentleman up in Yorktown Heights. In fact, I saw his son on Saturday morning, Dan Thaler. It was Dr. Jerry Thaler, though, who was for many, many, many years the cooperative weather observer in Yorktown Heights. And he, I believe, measured, I think now, I'm not sure if it was 4 or 6 inches of snow on the ground at this particular time in 1979, October the 10th. Also, they had snow down in Baltimore. If you remember, Joe, the Baltimore Orioles were playing the Pittsburgh Pirates in the World Series. Yes, at this particular moment in time in 1979, the World Series was already underway. We're not going to start the World Series until the last few days of October this year. But it was a big thing back then that they actually saw snow as far south as Baltimore. You were right, New York City, even though the low temperature got down to only 37, didn't get to freezing, they did have wet snow that did accumulate to a trace, and eventually the temperature got up to 47, I think, later on that afternoon. But that was a full something like, 15 or 17 degrees below normal. It was a pretty amazing day. And then, 10 years ago, no, 11 years ago, in late October, I think the 29th of October, we had more than just a trace. New York City, I think, had like 2 inches or 2.5 inches, and places up north like yours truly got over a foot of snow. I was not living in Putnam Valley in 1979, so I cannot tell you how much I had back then, but I'm sure it was more than just an inch or two. If Dr. Thaler in Yorktown Heights had at least 4 or 5 inches, I certainly would have had that much. But I'm also assuming that by mid or late day, most, if not all of that, had melted, which means I would not have had to break out the snowblower this early in the season.
One of these, with the World Series pushed it to November. One of these years, depending on where they wind up playing, if it's in a northern city, there's going to be a snowstorm that's going to cancel a game. It may not be this year, but one of these years coming up, it's going to happen. Leon Probitsky, an early super chat hitting the tip jar. Thank you, Leon. And David Fuller also hitting super chat tonight, saying still no word when and if he's having his surgery, but they're going to call you, David. I know you don't want to have this surgery, but they are going to call you, and you'll be a much better and happier person for it. I had 3 surgeries this year. I've never had surgery in my life till this year, and I had 3. Saturday, my father and brother will bring my fruit trees to my apartment, to keep the cold at bay. I think that's a wise decision on his part. Looking at everything going on, as far as the pattern is concerned, I really didn't see too much with regards to changing. Oh, I wanted to mention too, Johnny Quest says he had a foot of snow on that particular day that you mentioned, Joe, and also he got down to 19 for a low, I believe, on Sunday morning. I didn't get that cold. I mean, I got into the 30s this morning, but we had, as we did night before, but both nights clouds came in. I really thought we were going to go lower, but clouds came in at the last minute and just kind of put a stop to how low the temperatures went. I didn't really see anything today that sort of negates the idea that we're going to, we get through the next couple of days, which are going to be generally nice days. Temperatures around, living a little bit above average, getting up, perhaps we'll go into the low 70s tomorrow. We'll probably do it again, upper 60s and low 70s tomorrow, upper 60s and low 70s on Wednesday. Thursday, we have a cold front, and I think we could get a fairly decent shot of rain out of it, and maybe even 1 or 2 rumbles of thunder after it goes by. We'll turn cooler behind it, but we have to wait for a second front to come in probably late in the weekend, maybe late Sunday night. And then after that, we look at next week, which I think is going to be mostly on the chilly side of normal. I didn't really see too much that kind of changed my mindset.
Do you think on Thursday we might have possibly severe weather, since there's a large area on Wednesday, according to SPC, of marginal risk just south and west of New York City? So I'm wondering whether or not some of that may get in here on Thursday.
I think it's possible. I think certainly they're going to have a general thunderstorm area, and they might stick in a marginal risk zone. Can't see why they wouldn't. It's a strong enough upper trough. You got good moisture inflow coming up from the Atlantic and also from the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah, why not? We'll know tomorrow, because then we'll come into the forecast range.
As we get a little closer, the overall picture gets a little bit clearer. Right now, a little bit fuzzy as to whether or not. I agree with you. I think we will see at least some rumbles of thunder, some convection on Thursday. As to the potency of that event, we'll see. We'll see.
And a big hello to everybody watching tonight on the Joe and Joe's weather show. Welcome to everybody that's on the chat board. You are new to our channel. Welcome aboard. And we are on Monday through Thursdays at 7:35 Eastern Time. So subscribe to my YouTube channel and make sure your notifications on YouTube are turned on, because this way you will be notified. And not always on time, but sometimes YouTube sends the notifications after the show is over or even the next day. That's their issue. But we'll do our best to notify you either on Facebook or Twitter, LinkedIn. Those of you who are on my weather platform on Patreon, you always get at least a 2-hour notification that there's going to be a show. Monday through Thursday, as we said, 7:35 Eastern Time for a start. Fridays and Saturdays, Joe and I usually take off, though if there's a storm, then we move the schedule around a little bit, and we'll be on a Friday or a Saturday or both. And Sunday mornings to start off your day at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So I'm going to bring up the U.S. satellite loop. By the way, some of the moisture from tropical storm, Julia, Julia, from Hurricane Julia, when it went into Nicaragua, some of that moisture is kind of pushed up into the Yucatan and into the Northwest Caribbean, and it still has that sort of arcing look to it that makes you think it could be suspicious. But most of the convection is over the Yucatan Peninsula, so that's one. If you're checking boxes, having convection inland is not conducive for tropical cyclone development. The other thing is that after Wednesday, with this front coming through, upper level winds in the Gulf of Mexico are going to become strong, and that will be unfavorable for tropical cyclone development, and that's something that the Hurricane Center indicated on their outlook. But meanwhile, across the country, except for some areas in northwest Texas and Oklahoma and in New Mexico and back through eastern Arizona where there are some showers around, much of the country is in October mode and relatively quiet and dry.
Must also point out, and we mentioned this yesterday, Julia is now the second tropical cyclone to make the unusual crossing from the Atlantic Basin into the Pacific Basin. And unlike other years where they would have changed the name or put a different name on this system, it retains its original title, Julia, now in the Pacific. Probably won't last very long.
Actually, it's gone.
It is gone.
As of 4 p.m., it is a remnant low.
Yes.
At 15.0 north, 91.6 west, moving northwest at 15, and it is a remnant low. So no additional advisories will be issued on Julia, and you can see the circle with the X there as it sits on just inland of the coast.
Somebody asked me, what would the chances be for a storm in the Atlantic Basin to go across Central America or Mexico, make it back out into the Pacific Ocean, and then maintain its strength to such a degree that it goes through the Eastern Pacific into the Central Pacific zone and then continues into the Western Pacific. I think if it gets to the Western Pacific, it would be a typhoon, not a hurricane or a tropical storm. And I think if it also somehow, impossibly, managed to get as far west as the Western Pacific, being a typhoon, they probably would change the name entirely. So,
well, we've had storms over the years. We've had storms that have formed in the vicinity of Hawaii that have crossed the international date line, and then they get renamed when they go to the other side. So yeah,
right, right.
So it does. I don't think there's ever been one that started in the Atlantic, went across the Pacific, and then moved over to the other side. Also, Anthony Orr. Let me just get us back full screen here for a moment, and then we'll go back to the maps. But Anthony Orr, who's our resident hurricane statistician, because he's so good, he finds all these details that are pretty fascinating. And let me see where it is. He sent this to me earlier, and I thank him for the work that he puts in here. He said a couple of things, Joe. This is going to tie into the fact that now that it's October 10th, it's going to be tough to get 4 named storms. Not impossible, but it's going to be on the tough side to get 4 named storms between now and the end of November. Not that we couldn't get one in December, but let's just say in the structure of the hurricane season, to get 4 more storms between now and then, just to get us to the normal of 14. But Julia is the 10th named storm, which actually formed 2 weeks after the average time of the 10th named storm, which is September 22nd. And as we, although it still doesn't mean that if we just get 1 or 2 more storms that they couldn't be a problem for somebody. But we're kind of deep into the season now, and after October 15th, the probability of development kind of goes down.
We're pushing the envelope. We're pushing the envelope by now. So, yeah, it's tough. Not to say that it couldn't happen. Sandy hit our area, I believe, on the 29th of October. So It still is possible, but the odds lower with each passing day now as we get deeper into the fall season.
And he also pointed out that only one storm on record took a track more to the south over South America than Julia, and that was Tropical Storm Brett back in 1993.
Wow. I can't believe it. That's almost 30 years ago. And 1993 to me seems like just a few years back. Time flies when you're having fun.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So let's go to the radar. I actually didn't even refresh the radar from this morning, so at least we'll get a look at what was on there this morning. I was a little surprised to see what it showed, and this was because of that ripple on the stationary front. Get me out of the way here. And let's get this picture centered a bit better. And this was, again, this morning where we had showers actually moving through parts of upstate New York on either side of I-90 that went into parts of Vermont and New Hampshire. They were mostly light. And some of the areas in the lighter blue, it wasn't even reaching the ground. But we'll take a look and give you this a refresh. And now we just got a couple of blips. It's actually a little blip there in central Massachusetts, but all of that's pretty much gone. The radars from Maine pretty much down to Florida, very quiet. There's a couple of downpours and maybe a thunderstorm or two that's indicated there in west central Florida and then off the Florida east coast. And here you see the showers and a couple of thunderstorms that we see in southwest Texas and also up into north central Texas and parts of Oklahoma, even into southern Kansas. A lot of scattered activity across New Mexico, Arizona, and particularly busy on the radar in Southern California, where we have some flash flood warnings up there, and also in Southern Nevada, Southwest Utah, quiet up in the Pacific Northwest, and then there's this little arm here, that's adorable, moving across northern Montana, just a teensy little arm. So let's go to the Storm Prediction Center. And there was, where'd that go? This was for today. There was actually a very small area of marginal risk in southwest Texas. You can see where the general thunderstorm risks are, and they pretty much line up with what we saw on the radar. Now for tomorrow, as Joe indicated, this is for Tuesday into Wednesday. We have a marginal risk from Oklahoma. Central Oklahoma, northeastward through the upper Mississippi Valley into Wisconsin and a small portion of the upper peninsula of Michigan. And as we move to day 3, this is Wednesday into Thursday, we have a marginal risk in the Ohio Valley and into the Tennessee Valley. So perhaps, again, I think maybe we'll see SPC do something with the potential risk. The day 4 to 8 time frame is probably going to show predictability too low for day 4, and then the rest of the way it's all potential too low.
Yeah, I think we will probably just do some simple extrapolation from day 2 to day 3 and then continue onward to day 4. I think on day 4, which would be Thursday, we will be in that zone for possible severe weather, if for nothing else marginal. And who knows, with the passage of time and with more data coming in, they may even up that into a slight risk, but we'll know more in the days to come.
That we shall. So where'd it go? I pulled up. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about the overall pattern going forward. A few of you have been asking about Siberian snow cover and a few other things with maybe trying to give us some clues with regards to the winter. But I pulled up, Joe, this was last night's European from the 0Z run. You would be proud of me. I've been ignoring the 6Z, the in-between runs in the longer range, because they've just been getting a little bit squirrely, and I've been kind of sticking with the primary runs with the let's call it the long range, beyond say 5 or 6, beyond 5 days. And looking at this upper air, it's very interesting to me that it sets up in such a way that if this were January, we'd be flooding flooded with Arctic air coming into the United States, particularly around the Great Lakes and moving into the Northeast eventually. And this is what you look for. And I think one of the primary things you want to look for is you want to look for that trough that you see. I have there at 160 degrees west, which is roughly around the longitude of the westernmost island of Hawaii, somewhere between, say, 150 and 160. Because when you have a wrapped up deep trough in that position, that produces a very strong ridge along the west coast and up into western Canada. And you see it there where I've got the blue line going up. And then there's a corresponding trough somewhere in the east close to 80 degrees west. Maybe this is 85 degrees west. And then there's a corresponding ridge out in the Atlantic. In this case, it's up around about 50 west that extends up into the Davis Strait. And that flow from the ridge in the west, if you would just if it were a slide, you would grab the top of the slide in Alaska, and then you would be sliding all the way down into the southeastern part of the United States. That is where our air would be coming from. This is a very, very chilly look to the upper air, and this was actually the forecast from the European for this coming Saturday morning. After the first front goes by, we're going to need a second front to get let's call it the real cold air, and that's not going to happen until sometime probably Sunday night or Monday. You have to wait for that front to come through to get to the core of the cold air that is building in. But this is a very, very chilly mid-October setup that we have here.
I'm not going to say one for the record book just yet, but as you are well aware, Joe, we've been talking about, and Climate Prediction Center, CPC, has been talking about the potential for very chilly, if not downright cold temperatures in the Northeast, in the Great Lakes, and in parts of the Mid-Atlantic coast now for the better part of the last week. And in fact, they're continuing that threat right on into the middle of next week. So it looks like if you thought that it was chilly now, just wait a little while, because this weekend and into early next week, we'd get even chillier.
Yes. And you might look at what's on the screen right now, and if you're watching and you're saying, why are we looking at the weather out in the entire Pacific Ocean? Well, one of the things that created this deep trough at 160 degrees west was a series of typhoons back about it's not quite about three and a half weeks ago. A series of typhoons that recurved east of Japan. One actually went west of Japan. Maybe two of them went west of Japan. One went east of Japan. And if you recall, it created this monstrous non-tropical storm in the Bering Sea, which eventually dropped over the Aleutians and created this very deep trough at 160 degrees west and ushered in that pattern that I just showed you right around the first day of autumn. And we've been mostly below normal temperatures since then. So another recurving tropical system from the Western Pacific could perhaps reinforce that pattern longer term. Now, I do see that there are a couple of systems down around 20 degrees north and about one is at 150 degrees east. The other one is at about 130 degrees east. They don't really show signs. Actually, the one that's further east winds up recurving, and there's a storm that goes up east of the Aleutians. There's also what looks like a non-tropical system that develops just east of Japan that eventually goes up. Joe, there's a 940-ish low approaching the Aleutians. By the time it gets there, it fills up to a 978, but there's a fairly powerful non-tropical storm that's going to be heading there in about 8 or 9 days, and we'll see if that winds up establishing another trough at 160 degrees west. There is also on this particular run of the GFS, there's actually another non-tropical system, a rather strong one that forms in China that starts to lift up, but then it doesn't really strengthen. It actually reaches peak strength, gets very strong there, 970 something low. It doesn't look like it's a tropical system, but it kind of weakens as it moves eastward. So these are some of the clues that we look for. The other thing is, I know a number of you have been asking about Siberian snow cover. It's a little early. I mean, we're 10 days into it, so we really won't have the first 10 days to look at for another day or two. But I do want to at least show you what the GFS is showing in terms of actual forecast snowfall for the next 10 days and next 16 days for Asia. And the idea here is that if you get active snow cover growth, particularly in the western flank of this, which is Eastern Europe, westernmost Russia, if you get that snow cover growth to come early, in that zone, it tends to be more favorable for winters to the east. Now, I will also throw in the fact that the Siberian snow covered idea has not worked well for the last 4 or 5 years. So you take it with a huge grain of salt. It worked well for a bunch of years in a row, and then it just suddenly stopped working. I think when everybody figured out it was time to look at it, we got thrown a curveball by nature. The other thing is to look for too is the southern flank of this. You want to see the snow cover growth extend down south of 40 degrees north by the time we get to the end of the month, and it's actually doing that to an extent. It's down maybe at about 45. This is total snowfall forecast, by the way. It's not. The snow could fall and then melt, so just bear that in mind. So when you're looking at snowfall being forecast, it's bullish to actually have the snow there that's forecast to come down, because without it you can't have snow cover. But whether the snow cover actually stays on the ground in between snowstorms there is a whole nother matter. And the other place I would just look at too is North America. Now here's where I saw this earlier, so let's see. The GFS today, Joe, is actually showing a fair amount of snow buildup, snow falling across Canada, particularly in central and eastern Canada, which is kind of interesting. This is the last frame here is October 26th. So we know that Canadian snow cover is very important, especially in the early part for the early part of the winter season. So we'll see if it winds up playing out or not.
Well, it stands to reason that if we're going to get a continuous advection or flow from northern and central Canada during the second half of October, with all of that snow on the ground already up north, it just has to be a string of below normal days or colder than normal days coming up. In fact, I will tell you, Joe, that the Climate Prediction Center is indicating 80 to 90% probability
you can show the map,
normal
by
temperatures.
The way.
Okay, below normal temperatures. I mean, it stands out quite a bit when you look at this. This is pretty amazing when you consider, especially that it is only in the early to middle part of October. I'm going to put it up on the screen for you right now. There, and there we go. Take a look. This is pretty it's pretty amazing on 2 counts. I mean, you look out west, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, portions of Nevada, all these places in above normal. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that would correspond to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 80 to 90%. 80 to 90% probability in this zone of above normal temperatures. And then you look on the other side of the coin over here in the lower Great Lakes and the Ohio Valley. This is 80 to 90% probability of below normal temperatures. And that extends outward into much of the Northeast. In fact, it looks like the only place in the Northeast that will have above normal or above probability for milder than normal temperatures will be up in northern sections of Maine. Everybody else will be below normal. And again, this one area here, which encompasses, let's see, that would be Detroit, I guess Indianapolis, Columbus, Ohio, Cleveland. I mean, this whole area here, 80 to 90% probability of below normal. That would be from the 16th through the 20th. And if you remember, Joe, last week we were showing this same area with the chance for unseasonably cold temperatures that was being indicated by the CPC, and they have not backed off. They now are saying from the 16th to the 20th, from next Friday all the way out to, from next Sunday all the way out to next Thursday, a week from this Thursday, below normal temperatures. And if you're wondering about, you see something like this and you say, well, wow, well, is there any place that has above normal precipitation? Maybe we might be looking at some snow, maybe. So we'll take a look here on the 6 to 10 and look at this, above normal for much of the Northeast. So who knows, maybe some of you out there will be seeing your first flakes of the season come early or middle part of next week if this pattern holds. Of course, out west where it's hot, it's also below normal precipitation-wise, so hot and dry for portions of the Pacific Northwest, and above normal in terms of precipitation for portions of New Mexico and for Arizona. And they have been in a drought. They continue in a drought, but it looks like nature is trying its best to alleviate it. Maybe not an all-in-one shot, but looks like there'll be quite a bit of shower activity here in the desert Southwest in the course of the next 6 to 10 days.
I'll go out on a limb, Joe. I'll just say what you just did too. I'll go out on a limb and say that if this pattern holds through, if this is going to be the primary pattern for a while, and it holds at least, let's not go. Let's answer this two ways. Because James Davidson says if this pattern continues, this would be a very record-breaking cold winter coming up the way it looks now. And James, I think that's the $99,000 question here. Is the pattern going to hold? If it holds in November, I think we're going to see an early snowfall in the Northeast. Maybe not necessarily on the coast, but I'm thinking maybe for inland areas it's not impossible. Frank Riggio brings up an interesting point in his comment about the volcano eruption earlier this year, the undersea volcano that threw up that huge explosion of moisture into the stratosphere. Will that have effect on the winter weather? I think that's another $99,000 question. It'll be interesting to see, because that was a monumental explosion of water vapor that went up into the stratosphere in the southern hemisphere. I don't know the mechanics of what happens down there in terms of how that impacts what happens up here, but it'll be interesting to see. I guess we'll have hindsight once we get into the winter months to see if there's some impact from that. Those with the greater minds and higher pay grades than Joe and I'm sure might be commenting on that down the road. So we'll leave that also as an open question. And Tom Contino disappointed with AccuWeather's forecast, because they came out with their forecast today. And look, I'm just going to tell you, as far as these forecasts are concerned, they're a dime a dozen. So I would not waste too much intellectual energy on, whatever it is, be it below normal, below normal cold, above normal snowfall, or below normal snowfall. It's so what? It doesn't tell you anything. It tells you nothing. My primary objection, Joe, has always been with those forecasts, and let me get myself back in here. My primary objection with those type of forecasts is they don't tell you anything. You could have it doesn't tell you are you going to have a winter. I think it would be more important if they. I think it would be more useful, for example, if they were to say that the winter might favor, instead of favoring large storms, it would favor a series of smaller storms. Or it would be a winter where you'd have to wait for the whole winter, just maybe for that one chance for the one big snowstorm. I find that maybe a little more useful. And even there, it's in those cases those examples I just brought up, it's limited at best. So okay, so don't worry. I really wouldn't. I really wouldn't expend energy over these broad long range forecasts because they're pretty useless and they basically are forgotten once we get into the winter months. Reality will dictate what we're going to get.
I agree with you 100% that they're basically forgotten. The only time that when a long-term winter forecast is brought up again is the following year. Like, let's say in August or September, when the almanacs start predicting the upcoming winter, they say, well, last year they went for. But other than that, I mean, nobody ever really talks about or remembers the prediction that was made in the late summer or early fall for the upcoming winter season. It happens, whatever happens, happens, and then it's pretty much forgotten. So we'll see what happens this upcoming winter season. But again, last December, record-breaking warmth across much of the country. Then it flipped to more normal circumstances and conditions in January. I made the comment last week that just being out of doors on my property last year, we had gigunda walnuts, and they didn't even look like walnuts. They looked like golf balls covered in green fur, and they were all over my front lawn. This year, I guess chiefly because of the dry conditions and also the hot weather that we had during the summertime, hardly any nuts at all. So last year we had
coincident indicator.
Well, I mean, if that be the case, maybe the script is being rewritten and we'll have a different outcome, at least going into the upcoming winter. Who's to say, Joe, that we might not have an exceptionally cold November and December like we had back in 1989, and then that flipped on New Year's Day. In fact, it flipped right into an unseasonably mild weather pattern for 1990, January, February, and March. But until then, until the end of December, everybody was saying, my God, look how freezing it has been, frigid it has been. We had a snowstorm, for goodness sake, on Thanksgiving 1989. Everybody was saying, oh, this is going to be one heck of a winter here in the Northeast. And then everything just changed. It changed, and it never got back to the cold and snowy conditions that we experienced through November and December of '89.
Exactly. And conversely, we've had winters like 14, 15, where December was about 3 degrees above normal, and the first part of January was nothing. I think there was one system that produced a couple of inches early in the month, and that was it. And everybody was in a state of panic. The winter, canceled. People were dancing in the streets until a typhoon in the West Pacific came along and recurved and moved east of Japan, went up into up toward the Aleutians, and energized a huge upper low that created a deep trough at 160, a big ridge in the west, a deep trough in the east, and we had 2 vicious months of cold and snow from the latter part of January, including the infamous half blizzard, right through the end of March. That was the 2 consecutive years, Joe, where Lake Ronkonkoma on Long Island was frozen until very late in the month. And the only reason why the ice melted was because of the sun angle. Because it just was that cold. So past performance is no indicator of future outcomes, but sometimes it's the only information you have, and it can go in either direction. So let's examine where we're going with our weather for the rest of this week, and of course the main player is this deep upper trough, and I've got the European model up. It's as good as any of the models today. And there's your trough that's swinging. This is the map for early Thursday morning. That is swinging eastward with a big pile of cool air aloft. It's not necessarily cool at the surface, or it is when it's coming down, but it may modify by the time it reaches the coastline. But you see the signatures here, that 160 trough, the 120 ridge, and not quite yet the ridge out in the Atlantic. There's some kind of upper low that is forming in in Greenland at this point. But that's going to go away, and you'll notice as the trough deepens and swings eastward, that ridge really builds between 60 and 50, about, let's say, 55-ish west into the Davis Strait. And while it's up there, it actually acts as a bit of a block there, forces the trough, instead of lifting out. It's kind of funny here. Usually they swing up into eastern Canada. You get an arm to rotate around, but that ridge is so strong, that big area of purple you see in the Davis Strait, that the upper low actually drops southward and then goes back northward and then reforms. And there's your arm that swings around into the eastern part of the United States for the week of Monday, beginning Monday, October 17th. The only difference on this run, Joe, the Europeans, the squirrely GFS in between run with the cutoff that it did yesterday. The Europeans doing something like that, only a little further north, starts to form a cutoff off the Jersey coast and takes it up into New England and eventually up into eastern Canada. The ridge in the west flattens toward around the 20th, and there's a flat ridge out in the Atlantic at the Pacific out at 160. So I think after this shot comes down, this main shot comes down, there might be a few days of, let's call it, rearranging of the chess pieces a little bit, and we'll see if this primary pattern we're in reestablishes itself.
Well, that's the big question, whether or not a pattern that has gone away for a while, and you say, okay, that's it, we're done with that, suddenly comes back and again becomes reinforced by another system, or becomes more reestablished again, and then you're back with the same old stuff, same old, yes, so to speak.
Well, Mrs. Ann Samble wants to weekly bring some troughing into the west at the end of the forecast period, but that trough doesn't really last very long. It starts to weaken there, and a little bit of ridging in the east, but here too, it does not particularly strong. So this could be that period where we get the chess pieces temporarily moving into different spots, and it might be after that they come back. Again, assuming that this is correct. This is on the 12Z run, by the way, of the European. Let's see the GFS, what it does on Mrs. Ann Samble's. Where are you? The GEFS. Yeah, the GEFS kind of has the same idea. It just actually the GFS ensemble takes a little longer for it to get there. But even here too, it's nothing. It kind of suggests to me that maybe we'll just go back. We'll go to a period of more normal temperatures for a little while before anything else is going to happen. So on that note, let's look at the U.S. and take a look at what the GFS holds for this week. Let me roll it back here to the present time. We'll put up what the radar is supposed to look like. And really, much of the country not doing much of anything. Tomorrow, you see a little band of showers there from Oklahoma to Illinois and Indiana. Then the front starts to swing east. It gets energized as it approaches the Ohio Valley Wednesday night. You see some showers even in the southeastern part of the United States. It hasn't rained here in over 4 weeks, believe it or not. And there's the rain coming in for Thursday night into Friday. This particular run sort of backed off from it. I'm going to go to the 12Z. I'm not liking this. I'm not liking that look. I think the 12Z's got a better handle here with some showers and storms coming through. It's actually pretty bullish for thunderstorms. It's got a nice looking line here Thursday evening, moving through New York State and in northern New Jersey. Then that goes out. We get a cool down, waiting for the second front that looks to come through sometime maybe on Monday. And then the main high thrusts in for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of next week. Again, no big storms, though, being indicated here. It's storm systems. This is for next Thursday, Joe. It's pretty much quiet from coast to coast with just a few odd places here and there getting some scattered precip. Yeah, that's kind of how it's October. That's kind of what happens.
Well, I'll echo. I'll echo what Miss Ballerite said. GFS showed warmer temperatures here in the Central Plains toward the end of October. If it verifies, I'll take it. And I'll take here in the Northeast. I'll take any continuation of quiet weather. I'd like it to be a little bit milder, but I mean, I don't. At this point in time, I'm not in the mood for any kind of major, breathtaking switch toward, let's say, a nor'easter or frigidly cold temperatures or tremendous wind. Just let it stay this way for a little while. And I don't know about you probably have seen more of a color change, especially of the deciduous trees, than I have, Joe. I mean, I still think about 80 or 90% of the trees in and around my area and on my property are more green than anything else. So I don't know when we're going to have, the change over to, the fall foliage and colors. It may not be until perhaps the early or middle part of November.
Yeah. Yeah, here it's early because we had a relatively cool September here, with some exception. The nights have been. I only have this is only my second summer through here, but the nights through the month of September were much cooler than what they were last year. And so far in October, also running. I've already had a bunch of nights in the 30s, and I've already been down to almost I've already been down to the freezing mark on one day. So I'm kind of hoping that that's my trend for the winter time, but then again, it's a long ways away. And in all seriousness, with heating oil prices the way they are right now, I think this would not be a good time to have a super below normal, record-breaking cold winter in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states, particularly in the Northeast, where heating oil is the primary driver of how people heat their homes. And on that note, let's get Briller Jeopardy underway. This is, I think, the third anniversary, Joe, of Briller Jeopardy. Scott's been just hammering away on a regular basis with all the work he does, and it's most appreciated is the participating in the program and having a little bit of fun.
So, do you have the questions? I don't have any questions.
I have the questions.
Okay.
And tonight, Joe, it's your category. Let's see. Astronomy.
Astronomy.
Astronomy. Okay. Which planet has the strongest windstorms?
That would be Neptune. They have winds of like 300 miles an hour on Neptune.
It says here 1,200 miles an hour, so maybe there's...
300 miles an hour sustained, 1,200 in gusts.
And higher gusts east of the center.
Yes.
What planet has the most thunderstorms?
Most thunderstorms? I would say Jupiter.
Well, according to the answer here, I'm seeing it's its next door neighbor, Saturn.
Saturn. Well, it's possible. The two planets, both of them are fairly similar. Yes.
No, finish your thought.
No, both planets are fairly similar. Of course, Saturn has rings. Jupiter has rings, but they're much thinner and not easy to see as opposed to Saturn. But what I'm saying is that both planets basically contain the same type of chemical constituents, and they're both gas giants. So if it isn't Jupiter, it's Saturn. But I can tell you this: even if Jupiter is second to Saturn, you wouldn't want to go to Jupiter. the whole planet is covered by at least a moderate risk of severe weather.
Well, that is you've already answered the next question, which is which planet has the most frequent storms?
Which would be probably Jupiter.
And that is correct. What is the only planet? Let's let the folks on the chat board. What is the only planet that would float in water? What is the only planet that would float in water? Let's see.
It's kind of like the ivory soap of the solar system.
Yes. Jason Schaefer already hitting the correct answer. Bobby Livingsworth says Pluto. Daniel Fitzsimmons says the Earth. No. Frank Riccio, Mercury. No. Jason Schaefer hits the $600 question with no, not that we're going to give you $600, but Jason Schaefer, Saturn.
And what is latex streams? We're talking about planets, latex, not people. He says Neil deGrasse Tyson.
No, no, no. I think I think he asked in the question before that if you've ever met him.
Have I ever met Neil?
Yeah.
I've known Neil for over 30 years. Yeah, I know Neil very well.
So it's
He and I were supposed to team up in Central Park to give a Starfest for the general public 2 weeks ago. And naturally, of course, came the night, and what happened? It rained.
yes. And the last question tonight is: what was the largest solar storm on Earth in the last 500 years?
It would have to be, I would think it is, the Carrington event of 1859. Is that?
That is correct. Yes,
Yes.
it is.
Yes.
And with that, you will not win the silver tea set from the Michael C. Fina Company, and you will not win a new mink coat from Dicker and
Dicker.
Beverly Hills.
Beverly Hills.
But we will send you a gift certificate from the Spiegel Catalog Company, Spiegel, Chicago, Illinois, 60609.
Joe, if you want to move out of the screen, my final thought for tonight.
Yes. Pshaw.
For all of the Met fans out there who are suffering like I am, what else can I say except better luck next year? That's all, folks.
And on that note, we are going to say good night. And thanks, everybody, for being here tonight. The regulars are here every night. We certainly appreciate it. We had a bigger crowd tonight than we usually have when the weather's quiet, and that's nice to see, too. Don't forget, hit the subscribe button for my YouTube channel, and you'll get notifications when the show is on, which is Monday through Thursday at 7:30 Eastern Time, 7:35 Eastern Time, and Sundays at 11 a.m., Fridays and Saturdays. We come on if there is a storm happening, and of course we always let you know when we're changing the schedule. So have a great night. We will see you tomorrow. Night, Mr. Rayo.
Nighty night, sir. See you tomorrow at 7:35.
Nighty night, everybody.